Welcome to the PAS Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The PAS Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nicholas Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the PAS Report Podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. Hope you had a great weekend out there. And this week, we're jumping right in as there's so much going on out there. I thought the Biden administration would be boring. There would be hardly anything to cover. But sure enough, regardless of Biden's mental capacity, there's a lot to talk about there. And I have two great guests coming in. Chuck Woolery and Mark Young from Blunt Force Truth are going to be here. And they're two great people. They bring common sense to the debate. If you haven't listened to Blunt Force Truth, you got to check it out. It's a great podcast out there. Make sure you subscribe to it. And before I bring in Chuck and Mark, go to the PAS Report website, sign up for the newsletter, and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. With that out of the way, I want to bring in Chuck Woolery, Mark Young from Blunt Force Truth. Gentlemen, glad to have you here. How are you today?
Good, Nick. Thank you very much for having us. We really appreciate it. We always love having you on our show. You're always a breath of fresh air and a mountain of information, so it's good to be with you again.
Glad to have you, Chuck. How are you, Mark?
I am doing well. And Nick, I want to say this real quick. You and I talked off here just a minute ago, and that is we're approaching a time where the Republic is in real jeopardy. And yet, as individuals, as real conservative individuals, we remain hopeful and we remain positive. We're not angry, which is amazing.
Well, we're also informed. Well, we're not so angry.
According to the left and the media outlets out there, we're violent insurrectionists. And I do have to say that your podcast has made history. I do believe it's the first podcast that ever had a police report filed against it.
Yeah, right.
I don't think there's ever been a podcast that's had a police report filed against it. Now, my audience may not have an idea of what I'm talking about.
Out of Columbus, Ohio. If you happened to catch Tucker a couple of nights ago, he had these two ladies on with the Columbus Academy in Columbus, Ohio.
Chuck Woolery, felonious podcaster.
Right.
Why did they file a police report, Columbus Academy, against the Blunt Force Truth podcast?
Well, apparently for something we said, or they perceived that we said it. The left is wonderful about taking things out of context that you say and then applying them to you as reality, because they have to lie to get ahead. They can't do it. They can't tell the truth and get ahead. So they have to lie about you. But maybe Mark knows more about that in detail than I do. I don't know if it was something I said or something that he said, but they fear for their lives because of our podcast.
Yes. So in the police report, they actually gave timestamps of the podcast. So they gave the police timestamps. You have to listen to to this space at 32.15 seconds. And what they said was that we threatened violence against them, and we forced the head mistress, what's her name, Soderberg or whatever her name is.
Mistress is a better word.
Yes, Mistress Soderberg, to go out and have to hire 24-hour security. Now, this is the great threat. The great threat was we said these people only respond to money. Why don't you take the tuition that you owe and put it in an escrow account with all the other parents until they deliver you the data you want?
Ooh, the violence.
So what we know is that when you threaten to take money away from a Marxist,
that's a violent threat.
That is a threat of physical violence.
Well, to the left, everything is violence when it comes to language. That's the way they define it.
Well, everything but violence is violence to them. I mean, they could create all kinds of physical violence, arson, you name it. That's not violence. That's just peaceful protest. But if you even say something about them, that's violent.
Chuck, you brought something up there, if I can touch on this. We've got people sitting in solitary confinement 23 hours a day because they went into the Capitol during the insurrection. First off, an insurrection is the attempt to overthrow a government.
Well, but Mark, listen, and Nick, I watch CNN and I watch MSNBC and I watch them faithfully. And I listen to what they say, and they say exactly that. It was an insurrection by people who wanted to overthrow the government.
And the headlines the other day were hysterical because apparently one of the people that has been arrested, they now found that he had a Lego Capitol building. The Legos, he built a Lego Capitol building. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, 40-year-old men playing with Legos, I'm not sure they're the violent insurrectionist I'm really worried about here.
Well, think about that mastermind in Michigan who put together the plot to kidnap the governor living in the basement of a vacuum cleaner shop. Okay, but back to DC for a minute. This insurrection. Now, according to the left and according to Martin Luther King, he said riots are the language of the unheard. Okay, so that's the justification for it. I'm not justifying a riot. I will tell you that Capitol Police opened the door and let people come in. We spoke to witnesses who were there who said the Capitol Police opened a door and let people in, which means the Capitol Police actually really suck at their job.
Well, we actually saw that on film. We saw that on film. I saw that several times on film where they were saying, as long as you don't really break anything, you're fine.
Yeah, some of the very rare footage you're allowed to see because all that footage is locked down.
How many hours? 40,000 hours or something?
No one can see it.
Number like that?
Yeah. No one can see it. But the bottom line is we have people sitting in solitary confinement without bond, with no bail hearings. But meanwhile, you can get arrested 46 times in New York and get put back out on the street with no bond.
You can. It's truly stunning out there. And just so the audience is aware that the majority of the charges, so first of all, no one's been charged with insurrection or sedition or anything like that.
Because it wasn't.
The majority of charges are trespassing. So essentially,
which violates the right to a speedy trial.
Correct. And you're sitting in solitary confinement for a trespassing violation, which in most parts of the country is actually a civil infraction. It's not even a criminal infraction. Whereas you look at places like New York City, you look at places like San Francisco, Chicago, Baltimore, they're falling apart. And I want to touch on that because I think it all has the same common theme where you have this far left push that is almost like it's mainstream amongst Democrats where it's just total control. That's what they want, total control of society. And as Mark, you pointed out before we started this, we had a little chat where you now have governments doing things that we thought were impossible just 3 years ago.
We never would have believed this could happen. When would we ever believe that our government would be taking political prisoners? Because that's what these people are. These people are political prisoners. This is North Korea stuff. This isn't, we've completely skipped over European and we've jumped straight to North Korea or China.
Well, we certainly have. If you read the National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism, in their pillar 2 of stopping domestic terrorism, it talks about controlling the supply and demand of information on the internet, meaning that the government and its social media minions, the big tech minions that work for the government, they're the ones that are going to be reshaping narratives. They're going to be controlling narratives. And here in my horrible state, I have Emperor Cuomo, which is nothing more than authoritarian, that's for sure. He now passed this New York State. He didn't pass it. He issued a decree that we now have a gun emergency here in New York State. And we're seeing this massive push against guns. And he says 83% of the guns are coming from outside the state. We also hear this in Chicago. Yet FBI data, their own data, the FBI, 7% of criminals actually purchased their guns through legitimate means, meaning 93% of criminals obtain their guns through other means, whether
which
it's
is already
theft,
illegal.
Black market. Correct. So we're seeing basically the targeting of legal gun owners here in the United States.
It's what they always do. They use the illegal gun owners to target legal gun owners. I mean, it plays right into their handbook. They love this. They like this. They are breaking these cities down one by one with a criminal element, letting them off, letting them do what they want to do, and not prosecuting, not holding, not anything. But then they come after people who are legal gun owners and blame them for what's going on with these criminals. And it's, we say this over and over again. It's not the gun. It's the finger that pulls the trigger. It's the criminal. That's the problem.
It's the gun. It's the gun, Chuck. Yeah, now, right. Is there
how about the hammer or the saw or the brick?
The car?
Those will be next.
Yeah.
So is there any coincidence? It's just coincidental that Cuomo just lost his emergency authority and just filed a new emergency authority for guns, right? This is coincidental?
Of course. Always coincidences. No, my audience is smart enough to know that there's no such thing as a coincidence in politics, that everything happens for a reason. And we saw everything Cuomo does is extraordinarily calculated. And we're witnessing that today. He is a very calculated man. He's very cunning. And we have a New York State legislative branch that has completely abdicated their responsibility. And we see this throughout the country, though, and that's my concern. So you, Mark, talked about that we're heading towards this authoritarianship. that we're heading down the pathway, and yet the ones that are supposed to be representing us aren't. What are we to do as ordinary Americans here?
One of the things that I'm really encouraged by, and that is that there is a record number of recalls going on in this country for positions like school board and city councils, and a record number of first-time people showing up to start running for these local offices. So it's nice to see that some people are starting to recognize that this is happening, because at the local level, even at the local level, you see communities that are, really strong red communities that are Republican communities, but they've got an all liberal school board. Why? Because those are the people that ran, because they got out and they ran for it. So now all of a sudden you have all these conservative, suburban families in a school board that is pushing critical race theory and 1619 Project down the throat of the kids.
Listen to this. I'm watching CNN this morning.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. And I'm watching this academic, quote unquote, speak to the host, and she said the problem with these parents who are rising up against critical race theory. So number one, this is a graduate class thing, this theory, studying this. They don't understand what they're talking about. They have no idea what critical race theory is. They're stupid or they're ignorant. And that's why they're rising up, because the Republicans have said this is all about dividing the country. And so between black and white, and that's why they're rising up. They don't understand what critical race theory is. I'm not so sure that these people understand what it is either, because it is a theory after all.
Well, I was about to say, they don't even know what the freaking word theory means.
Yeah, right. Not only that, what that academic who is just a moron, because in their own statement, they're explaining exactly why critical race theory shouldn't be pushed. It's a graduate course that's taken in college.
Exactly.
And so 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds have not developed the skills to possibly understand it. And that's the amazing, the logic of the left. Well, they always defy logic and in their own little world. So they're the ones that are dumb and ignorant. But what they're pushing out there is toxic. It is poison. I just released an episode talking about how we have an entire generation that has this hostility towards America. They don't know why. They can't explain it if you try and pin them down.
Yeah, don't you think it's interesting now that when you poll young people in America, the percentage of young people who want to be in America is lower than the percentage of people around the world who want to be in America?
Well, they can always have the option to leave.
Well, I think that we should do something that I called for. I said that as part of the education curriculum, in order to get your high school diploma, the United States, we should have to send kids out for 2 months, not to some European liberal country, but to some third world country that understands what life is really about, where every day is a day of survival. Send them there for 2 months, and I could guarantee you they'll come back with an appreciation for the United States.
I've been saying that for years, Nick, and I didn't say 2 months. I even said 2 weeks. But I'll tell you, you send people to Guatemala for 2 weeks, just 2 weeks. Just tell them to go to Guatemala for 2 weeks and live with the people there, and come back and tell me your life is hard. Or Haiti, or North Africa. I mean, pick your spot.
I have a theory, and my theory is the easier things get in the United States for the population, whoever they are, the more they gripe about things that don't matter. They start whipping up things. That's not just
a theory, Chuck. That is actually how human psychology works.
I mean, it's like everybody's so well off here. You got to find some fault somewhere, and so they pick the flag. I mean, now the flag is considered toxic. The BLM has said that they think the flag is absolutely a toxic symbol.
Yeah, let me jump in there for a second. So BLM, or the Utah branch, this is her exact post. So she's speaking for all Black Americans. When we Black Americans see the flag, we know the person flying it is not safe to be around. When we see this flag, we know the person flying it is a racist. When we see the flag, we know that the person flying it lives in a different America than we do. When we see this flag, we question your intelligence. We know to avoid you. It is a symbol of hatred.
There you go.
And that's how you destroy societies. That's how you destroy societies, because no society could possibly exist with the self-loathing that we're seeing today, where we're seeing this disdain. When did the American flag become political? When did talking about American greatness become political? But it has. And I can guarantee you at the Olympics, that's going to be kicking off in a few weeks, I guarantee you that the idiots in America will be the only ones turning their backs on the flag. Every other country and their people, nobody's going to turn their back on their flag.
Well, it'll have to be the people who are participating because there will be no audience.
Oh, yeah.
They apparently didn't listen to what Tokyo passed today, and that is nobody's going to be able to go in the stands. All these people who bought tickets to go to Tokyo, there's not going to be any audience at all.
Well, I haven't been a fan of the Olympics since the end of the Cold War because it just lost its flair after that. At least in the Cold War, is like a competition was really there. But it truly is stunning. You have all this self-loathing going on. You have the reshaping of America as this horrible, evil country that we're based on colonization. We slaughtered Native Americans. We kept blacks enslaved. And it's not like we hide from our past. We always talk about it. Yet it's like we're the only country that we apply these standards to. You ask any of these people. So Campus Reform, and they did a great interview with college students at George Washington University or Georgetown University, $82,000 a year to send your kids there. And they talk about oppression. They talk about how America's this evil country. And I'm sitting there thinking, talking about privilege, attending an $82,000 a year school, and you're sitting there talking about how you're oppressed.
They don't get it. They really don't get it. And there's another thing that's happening, I think, that's undermining our society. And I think the Democrats are behind this. The far left is behind this. And that is everyone is going to feel unsafe because of crime. So they're literally promoting criminals and crime just to give you a sense of insecurity, a sense that you can't go to the store, you can't go to the mall, you can't go to church, you can't go anywhere else, because if you do, somebody's going to shoot you.
It's an attempt to make you more dependent on government. Now, let's increase crime. Let's flood the country with illegal weapons. And now let's go after the people with weapons that are legal so they can no longer defend themselves. By the way, back to Cuomo just for a second, if I could. He also just signed a bill that your useless legislature put together, now making it legal to sue gun manufacturers. Now, there is a federal law that says you can't do that. But New York, this is interesting. New York has decided that New York law supersedes federal law now.
Going against Article 6 of the United States Constitution, which is the supremacy clause that says that state laws cannot conflict with federal law.
Well, according to New York laws now supersede federal law because you can now sue a gun manufacturer in New York. Now, if I'm a gun manufacturer...
Explain how dangerous that is, Mark.
Well, first off, the idea is that New York's new law says that gun manufacturers are responsible for the misuse of their product. So an example of that would be a drunk driver crashes into you and you sue Ford Motor Company because the drunk driver misused that F-150 pickup that hit you. That is literally the analogy of what they're saying.
Can I also sue the alcohol manufacturer too? Because wouldn't that be same exact thing?
No, it would be exactly the same thing, but you can't do that. But in New York now, you can supersede federal government, federal laws, and you can sue a gun manufacturer. Now, by the way...
Now, will this stand? Does this have any chance of standing?
No, I'll tell you exactly what's going to happen. Somebody's going to sue a gun manufacturer in state court. The gun manufacturer is going to immediately declare legally going to declare a national nexus and claim that it's a federal issue. And they're going to move the case out of the state courts and going to move the case into federal court. Once you move the case in the federal court, guess what laws rule? Federal laws. Right. So now the case gets dismissed. So it's not that the legislature and Cuomo are doing anything about guns.
It's all posturing.
Right. Understand this is blue smoke and mirrors. No one's getting sued. No gun manufacturer is going to be sued in New York. This is Emperor Cuomo trying to say, look at me. I've been here, 10 years?
12. We're going on 12.
So I've been here 12 years. And by God, I just found out guns are a problem in New York. And I'm taking bold and swift action, people, because the only answer to crime in New York is I need more emergency powers.
It's really interesting if you juxtapose Texas gun laws against, New York, Illinois, California. We have less crime in our republic of Texas than any of those places do as far as guns are concerned. So it's really not a gun problem. It's a people problem. And until people drill down and find out that yes, to many people in cities and places like that, guns are dangerous and they're scary and all of that kind of thing. But there is a place for it with responsible gun ownership, and criminals are not responsible gun owners.
Chuck, if you go to the stats, you know who John Lott is. John Lott's a friend.
Right.
John has done great work. John has shown that statistically, every state that has created a must issue or shall issue law, and what that means, folks, is in many states, and it still is in some, you can't, in a shall issue state, that means like a Texas, Florida, Michigan, as long as you're not a criminal, as long as you pass a background check, as long as you've done whatever training the state asks, the state has to issue you a permit to carry a weapon. They can't deny it. In New York, they can deny it.
Don't even
Chicago,
need a permit
they can
now.
deny it.
I can carry a weapon without a permit. I can open carry it.
Because now Texas is what's called constitutional carry. But what I'm saying is every state that went to shall issue or constitutional carry immediately had a major drop in violent crime right after that law passed. And the reason for it is because criminals don't like consequences. And this is the reason crime is going crazy in these states where there's no bail, where there's no bond, where the cops can't chase you. It goes up because there's no consequences. Places like Texas, Florida, Michigan, once criminals knew that grandma, when I snatch grandma's purse, she might, double tap me with her 9mm. People started thinking twice about.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because I was talking to someone from Texas when I was in Homeland Security and everything, and they were talking about Hurricane Katrina, that when everyone was being taken out of New Orleans and they were sending them to Houston, they saw a rise in carjackings until the first person pulled out their gun and shot the carjacker dead, and then no more carjackings after that.
Exactly. Consequences matter.
But Mark, you said something interesting. So you talked about if you could pass a background check. Well, according to the narratives of the Democrat Party and according to the press, background checks don't happen. We need these comprehensive background checks. So why is the media just lying? And why is Democrat officials lying to the people, saying that background checks don't take place?
Well, they lie about the background checks. They also lie about what they call the gun show loophole.
Explain that to the audience.
So you constantly hear the left say people are getting all these guns in New York because they're going to West Virginia and they're buying guns at a gun show where there's no background check. There's no transfer of ownership. None of that is true.
It's not true. And they said, I went to a pawn shop here locally, where I'm not going to say where it is, but I went to a pawn shop and I wanted to get a particular gun. The guy said, well, I can get it to you, but you have to wait 3 or 4 days to do a whole background check through feds and ID and all that kind of stuff. And then I'll issue it to you. So I waited and I got it, but I had a background check.
Correct.
That was on my Chiapa Rhino that nobody has.
But you have to have a background check to be able to buy the gun. But the same thing at a gun show. If you go to a gun show, you still have to do a background check. You still have to do the paperwork to buy the gun. None of this is true. But
again, they have to lie to promote it would be easier to figure out when they tell the truth, because it's so rare that it's easier to follow that than it is when they lie.
Well, think of Cuomo saying 80% of all the guns in New York are being bought, legally in other states. Right. There's no evidence to show that. In fact, there's overwhelming evidence to show that he's a bald-faced liar.
And if that was true, it would be so easy to track those gun sales from the other states, because those people would have put their licenses out.
Exactly.
And in most other states, if you have a out-of-state license, you're not going to be able to buy a firearm. And here's another lie that everyone screams, oh, gun violence, gun violence. Well, what most people don't know is that the DAs in many of these cities aren't even enforcing the gun laws that they have on the books. They are dropping the charges of those that are caught with illegal firearms. So
thank you, George Soros. Again, I'm going to bring his name up.
Bring his name up.
He's the guy that funds all these people who are running against anybody else, and he's the guy who's winning this battle. He's got his money behind. I think George Soros is like a guy who plays Monopoly. It's a game to him. I mean, it's one thing to bring a country to its knees or to transform it or to ruin it or whatever. And I think the damage that he does, he really is one of these guys who sits home, wrings his hands and goes, see, I knew it's easy to do. All you have to do is this, bing, and he does it. And he's got the money to do it.
Chuck, you're actually spot on with that, because George Soros, he used to give to just the congressional candidates, Senate candidates. He used to give to the Democrat Party itself and everything. But he figured something out. He figured that he wasn't moving the needle at all. He wasn't really making the changes. And he wants to be the puppet master behind the scenes to prove his power and influence. And that's where he infiltrated the DA races, the district attorney races throughout the country that nobody really pays attention to.
Right.
Exactly.
And now he owns people like Gascon and
he owned Kamala Harris.
All of these. You look at these people
Larry
in Chicago.
Krasner, Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Why do you think Juicy Smollett never was charged with a crime? Because the prosecutor belonged to George Soros. And that's the reason. You look at Chicago with 108 people shot last weekend. And first off, Lori Lightfoot says, well, if you criticize me, it's because you hate black lesbians.
Right. Of course.
Has nothing to do with I'm just incompetent and look like Beetlejuice.
Yeah, but I actually think she looks more like the shrunken head guy from Beetlejuice as opposed to Beetlejuice himself. So, and I always just
poor Lori Lightfoot.
Well, I mean, listen, you say stupid things.
Yeah, you got to get
you push racism. Back. I'm going to push it back at you. I mean, listen, the idea that you're racist if you question Lori Lightfoot, it doesn't matter anymore. Now that the American flag has been declared racist, we are all racist. So you know what? I'm just going to push back on you. You're going to call me racist anyway.
Yeah.
So is every member of the military and every police officer with a flag on their shoulder now a white supremacist and a racist?
The answer to that is yes.
Including the black officers?
Correct.
Yes.
So they're racist. They hate black people also?
Yes.
Well, if we look at the stats, and it's interesting you bring that up, if you actually look at the FBI data, black cops are more likely to kill black suspects. Hispanic cops are more likely to kill Hispanic suspects. White cops will kill white suspects. And of course, there's exceptions to the rule, but that's where it mostly goes. But it doesn't matter. If you're a black cop and you kill a black suspect, it's still white supremacy that caused that to happen because the system's based on white supremacy. That's what they're going to argue.
You know, I'm going to say something.
Illogical.
I'm going to say something is absolutely, I will get pillared for this, but I'm going to say it anyway because it's true.
I don't want to become the second podcast to have a police report filed against it. So,
if George Floyd,
we're taking you down with us.
If George Floyd had just followed the requests of the police, he would be alive today.
Correct.
Can't we say that in almost every case?
Yes,
absolutely. Take that in the case of, I forget the name of the case, but the female cop who accidentally shot a suspect.
Right, yeah.
Because she shot her, grabbed the wrong gun. Instead of grabbing her gun, instead of grabbing her taser, she grabbed a gun. The reality is he was driving on bad plates. He wouldn't follow commands. He fought with the police. He then jumped in his car and tried to speed off in the car. At several points in that brief time, he controlled the opportunity to stop this from happening.
Why?
But we're not allowed to talk about personal responsibility.
Why is that? I mean, have we just lost all control where we can't talk about personal responsibility and the responsibility that people have? Are the police so reviled by the left that they have to be responsible for everything that happens?
I can explain it to you because of the academics, because the so-called elite, the ones that believe that they're smart, the ones that everyone considers experts, but they're the biggest morons around, have deemed that things like personal responsibility are simply a white construct, that expresses whiteness.
You know what's really weird when you talk about that? You know something that's considered a white construct, which I find irritating as hell?
Math.
Being on time.
Yes.
I mean, what? That's insane.
Well, some of the schools now claim that black students shouldn't have to turn their papers in on time because that's a white construct. It's racist. Math is racist. But I have a question for both of you. In New York, a shooter is not the responsible party for a shooting. The gun is, right?
Right.
I mean, we've established that, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Then when a cop shoots somebody, didn't the gun do it?
No, because it doesn't fit a narrative at that point. Once again, we are living in a bizarre time where we elevate the criminals and we demonize police. That's the times we're living in. Like, if I was a black person, I would find it highly offensive. Listen, did George Floyd deserve to die? No. Should he have followed the instructions? Yes. However, George Floyd is no Martin Luther King, but there are people that are elevating him to that status. And I'm just sitting
beyond
there,
that
look
status.
at what you're praising.
Yeah, he praise his birthday every year.
Yeah, he was a thug. He was a drug addict. He was a thug. He's a person who robbed a woman at gunpoint. He was not someone to be revered.
Well, I want to ask this question. So I don't
Either
care.
Al Sharpton, but look at him. They revere him too.
Take away race. If we look at race, when was the last time a black teacher was shot, a black lawyer was shot, a black doctor was shot, or a Hispanic doctor, Hispanic teacher, Hispanic lawyer? When were they shot by police officers?
Couldn't answer that if I
probably
had
have a hard time being able to find that event.
Yeah. And yet nobody talks about that. I mean, that should be the ultimate question. If the system is inherently racist, wouldn't we see professionals, regardless of color, being shot because the system is inherently racist? And it's just all about black people.
Let me take this a step further. Why, if you're black, you are permitted to do all of these things? It's okay if you don't respond to what police say. It's okay if you resist arrest. It's okay.
Oh, I can answer that one, Chuck.
Okay.
The defense of that is because if you're a black man being stopped in America, you know the police are going to kill you. So you resist because you're fighting for your life, because you know they're going to kill you anyway.
It's just the opposite.
Well,
the opposite
is reasonable, though.
If you put your hands on the steering wheel and respond to them, reasonably, you're not going to get killed.
And the scariest part of all, it's the white liberals that are pushing the narrative. Mm-hmm. That's the scariest part, who are speaking for the black community. You never see reporters going into a black community and actually going door to door, speaking with them, asking them if their lives are now better because cities have been burned down, or worse off and more difficult because cities have been burned down. We have polling that shows 80% of the American people want an increase in law enforcement. And I'm talking about in the areas that are most impacted. And that's where it's key, that the elite politicians, the ruling class, they don't care because it's not in their neighborhoods. They'll do something like bail reform because the criminals aren't released back into their neighborhoods. The criminals are released back into the neighborhoods that they continue to victimize over and over and over again.
So I'm watching Austin City Limits, which is a music show. And on this show, there's a black woman who's extraordinarily talented, great guitar player, great singer, the whole thing. She has a black dress on that's leather, I think. And on her dress is the name of, remember their names, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and it was up and down her sleeves and her whole dress in the front and back, all the names of black people who have been shot. And I thought to myself, well, that's interesting, but what about all the children in Chicago, all the innocent bystanders in New York, guys who are riding home from class, who are working their way through college,
sitting on a subway.
Yeah, and they get shot through the window by someone. What about their names? We don't know their names, and we don't care about their names because why? Why is it we only care about those people that she had on her dress, but there are thousands, literally thousands of others get shot every day, get killed every day, and nobody knows their names because they don't care. It
doesn't fit a narrative. So you just had Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib come out and say that we should just do away with Border Patrol, ICE, that the Homeland Security should be completely defunded, essentially calling for open borders, allowing anyone to come in here. Well, no one asks the Hispanic community, who does MS-13 target? They're not targeting me. They're not targeting Italians. They're targeting other Hispanics. They're making those people's lives miserable in that community. And so you're hurting them. And that's where I say that the politicians are so far removed from serving the people that they've sworn to serve.
Well, let me give you a conspiracy theory that will be accused of being a conspiracy theory, but it will eventually be proven to not be a conspiracy
theory. Well, we're already going to be accused of racism. 3 white guys talking about the issues of race, so just lay on the conspiracy theories.
So last year, Chuck and I were accused of conspiracy theory when we laid out the entire issue of the Wuhan virus coming from Wuhan. And again, we laid it out, came from North Carolina, went there, Fauci funded it. We laid the whole out. We were crazy. Here's what I think is happening. I don't think Democrats in general are actually in favor of crime because
you're talking about voters.
Talking about voters and actually the Democratic leadership over the long term. They are short term in favor of crime, but not long term in favor of crime. I believe that the Democrats genuinely want a powerful police department. In fact, I believe they want a powerful police state.
They want 100%. A federal police department.
Correct. Now you're catching on. when we start to look at defunding the police, we're not talking about defunding the federal government, are we? We never hear defund the feds other than Rashida Tlaib. We're talking about defunding municipal department, that these are the bad people.
Take away states' rights. They just do it every day.
But it's not only you're right about taking away the states' rights and taking away the city's rights. But I think this is even more insidious. I think that they want an unarmed society with a federal policing power, because you're not going to get, I'm telling you this as a once city cop, you're not going to get New York cops to shoot New Yorkers just for owning a gun. You're not going to get local cops shooting their neighbors. But if you can get federal police, you have a much better chance of doing this. And the reason is because, like any federal law enforcement operation, if you grew up in New York and you join the FBI, guess what? They're going to move you to Dubuque, Iowa as your first job. They immediately relocate you to where you don't live.
Let me give you an example of something. What what country has federal police that are so corrupt that they are into everything? They're into border, they're into graft, they're into everything. It's Mexico. They have a federal police, and you can't trust any of them.
Well, Guatemala. So years ago in Guatemala, the police, the federales in Guatemala, tried to take me and a friend hostage. So it was the police. It was 5 police officers with automatic weapons who were going to take us hostage if we didn't pay them ransom. That is the law enforcement. That's actually the law in Guatemala. Now, who do you call?
Yeah. Well, that's a lot of countries out there. I mean, we see it time and time again, but the reason that they want it is, you're right, to create this powerful central apparatus, something the founding fathers aboard. That's why they created the system of federalism. But they want to take, they don't really believe in crime. And
they believe in corrupt.
If you listen to Democrats in I was talking with someone earlier doing a radio interview about immigration, and we talked about how if you listen to Democrats in 2006, you would think they were hardcore right-wing conservatives with the things that they were talking about. Yet they've normalized it. We've seen this infiltration in the Democrat Party, and so the end game is power. We know that's the end game, and
changing the demographics of the United States.
But the increase in crime is a useful tool right now. The jacking crime up and not going after criminals is a way of breaking society down. By the way, have you both noticed? So the death
of American citizens works for them.
Collateral damage. It's collateral damage. Now, did you both notice that Nancy Pelosi just opened up essentially a police office in Tampa and San Francisco?
Right.
Well, we call her Queen Pelosi here because you're not allowed to criticize Queen Pelosi. Otherwise, you'll be censured by Congress. However, if you sit there and you criticize Jewish people, well, Ilhan Omar gets a pass every day of the week for that. If you call the United States a terrorist state, you get a pass for that. But God forbid you criticize Queen Pelosi, now you're in trouble. And so one of the things, and I know where you're going with this, Mark, but before you get there, I want to point out, we could defund the police in every major city, but you can't defund the Capitol Police. We got to increase funding to the Capitol Police.
Well, that's why this whole thing, this insurrections, quote unquote, is going on, and these people are all in jail. You do not defy Congress. You can defy anybody else. You can come up against anybody else. You can burn their business down. You can burn buildings down. You can assault them. You can steal from them. But boy, don't do it in Washington.
Nope, because we'll increase funding for the police, and we're going to build a wall around the Capitol building to make sure we keep you out.
So the function of the Capitol Police, think about it. They're the Capitol Police. They're there to defend the Capitol. Okay. They now just opened an office in Tampa and San Francisco.
Now, what
Capitol are they defending?
Why did they open the office in Tampa and San Francisco?
They're looking for terrorists, I guarantee you.
Well, I'll give you what the excuse is. The excuse is that threats against members of Congress is becoming so widespread, especially Queen Pelosi, that the Capitol Police actually need to be local now in San Francisco, to where she lives when she occasionally flies home at our expense on a military jet. So she needs Capitol Police literally located there. Oh, no, they can't just travel with her. They now have to have an office in San Francisco so that Capitol Police can coordinate with other law enforcement agencies to protect Queen Pelosi.
And when Congressman Steve Scalise got his hip blown off, well, he's not important enough. And Republicans in Congress aren't important enough. There was no real threats against them, even though we saw the real violence that actually occurred when you had a Bernie Sanders supporter shoot them. And it shows to the hypocrisy of the Democrats. Do they see their own hypocrisy? Do they see the irony in their arguments?
They see opportunity in hypocrisy. They see opportunity in everything negative that we think is positive. They see opportunity and they will seize it and take advantage of it.
They think we're stupid.
It's like this woman who's the academic who came on and said, these parents don't understand what they're doing. They don't even understand CRT. They think we're stupid.
They do think we're stupid. And
listen, I mean, I bash everyone, so I don't care who gets insulted or whatnot. But the reality is, are they wrong? I mean, just look at the coronavirus epidemic.
No, there are a lot of people who are stupid. There's
look
no
at how government determined what businesses are essential, which ones aren't. And of course, all the major top corporations, they stayed in operation where the small businesses were bankrupted. You had a government dictate when you could practice your faith and when you can't, that we could have liquor stores open, but AA meetings are going to be shut down because of the coronavirus pandemic, that if you protest any lockdowns, you're a white supremacist. But if you protest racial justice, well, that's no problem. You're not going to spread coronavirus that way. So when we actually look at it,
I think
what's going on with the American people?
I think what happens that here's the mistake the Democrats make, I believe. They confuse stupidity with complacency. I think the American people have been very complacent about a lot of things, and they've gone along with them, and now they're waking up, and they're not going to be complacent anymore. And now that they're not complacent, now they've got to fight back with all these people going up against these boards, these school boards, and all this stuff. Now they got another fight on their hands, so people are now not so complacent anymore.
But here's the fear, Chuck.
Hold on. Just before you go, Mark, I just want to say it's a great point that you brought up. The American people aren't stupid. They're just naive. They thought that government was operating in
their favor.
And the government hasn't been operating in good
And by
faith.
the way, you can really thank Trump for this. Trump is the one who's exposed all of this in his 4 years of tenure as president. And they hate him for it because he literally allowed them and made them pull back the veil.
And boy, is it ugly.
But history tells us something that is disturbing. And we talked about this before the show. History tells us that it is normal, it's human behavior for people to relinquish or give up a little bit of their freedom at a time because they're busy, they want to be secure, they've got families to raise and jobs to attend to. So they give up a little bit of freedom here and a little bit of freedom there and a little bit of freedom here and a little bit of freedom there. And typically the masses don't recognize that they've lost their freedoms until the boot of tyranny is on their throat.
It's like boiling a frog.
And we've seen this in Germany. We've seen this in Venezuela. We've seen this in China. This is, and that's why people like you, Nick, like Chuck, that's why just the fact that we're out here trying to wave these flags and get people to know is so important. I want to tell you guys something about Florida. We were talking about Florida, and I love Florida. And that's where my second home is. Chuck, you were talking about going into a pawn shop. So I went into a gun shop in Florida, and this was a few months back when you still had to have a mask to go someplace. So I go in this gun shop, and I'm looking around, and this young guy walks in with his girlfriend, and they're wearing masks. And the guy who owns the gun shop goes, "Hey, stupid, this is a gun shop. If you're wearing a mask, we assume you're here to hold us up."
Well, it's true. You never used to be able to walk into a bank with a mask or a gun shop with a mask. It was always frowned upon to do those things.
And by the way, Fauci is still promoting this. Still saying,
even if you're vaccinated,
if you're vaccinated, it doesn't matter. You got to wear a mask because you got to protect other people. I mean, you could be carrying this virus and you just don't know it.
I'll tell you one thing, man. Fauci. So it goes Brennan, Clapper, Comey, McCabe, and now Fauci on my list of public officials that I despise, absolutely despise.
Mm-hmm.
And with
Fauci created the virus. He helped create it.
Well, and that's the thing. We've allowed this government apparatus to grow so large, so powerful. And that's the sad part, because all we had to do was listen to the founding fathers. All we had to do was listen to Benjamin Franklin when he said, those that give up their liberty for more security deserve neither. Or John Adams that said, liberty once lost is lost forever. And it's that we've forgotten, and we don't educate students on America anymore. And I'm talking about real American history, not the crap 1619 project that's a false made up history that doesn't really exist.
Thank your teachers union for that.
Well, think how fast things are unwinding. When we were talking about stuff that would have happened 3, 4, 5 years ago, or 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, we wouldn't even be able to fathom something happening today. Right now, Walter Schaub, who is the Obama ethics chief. Okay, so you're the ethics chief under Obama. Okay, so you already right. So you already meet a really low bar, right? He has come out just eviscerating the Biden White House. Now, how bad is your ethics when the ethics chief from Obama says you have no ethics?
Well, what's he criticizing?
And here's the story. The story is people are now paying extraordinary amounts of money for Hunter Biden artwork. So there are millions of dollars being paid for Hunter Biden artwork because he is such a brilliant artist.
Well, we don't know who's buying these things.
Not only do we not
China.
know, we will never know.
Do you think George Soros has them all around his office?
What type of art do we call? Is it crack art? That, the art you make when you're high on crack?
Instead of sniffing it, you blow through a tube, and that's you create the art that way, I think.
Well, it looks like he filled different squirt guns with different colors, and he just started squirting them at a canvas. But the bottom line is, the White House has deemed that all the purchasers, this is what they're calling their safety net, all the purchasers of Hunter Biden artwork will be hidden and never disclosed. And follow me, Hunter doesn't know who they are, so that there can be no ethics breach where Hunter, might do something wrong, because there's no possibility that someone might just buy $10 million worth of Hunter art so that they can have dinner with dad.
Does the big guy get 20%?
Well, yeah, just like the big guy never met any of Hunter Biden's associates, which has proven to be a total lie, but he's not held to the same standard. I mean, when we look at President Trump and how they went after him, here we have legitimate, no arguments, there's no disputing it. We have Hunter Biden's laptops in his own words with his own pictures showing the corruption.
With his own hooker.
So is the DOJ independent? Is the FBI independent? No. They're controlled by leftists. They're controlled by Democrats. Otherwise, Hunter Biden would be in deep trouble right now.
Well, that's where I'll disagree. I don't think they're being controlled by leftists. I think there's an unholy alliance with leftists, but I don't think they're being controlled by leftists. I think
they are leftists?
It's the ideological power. It's basically the bureaucracy has been infiltrated at every single level. And it's been weaponized. It's similar, and it reminds me of what President Erdogan of Turkey did, where he was seen as a moderate when he first came into office. And then when all the senior leaders were retiring, he'd appoint these radicals. Well, the same thing holds true here, where in our bureaucracy, it's thoroughly corrupt. The bureaucrats think that the American people are too dumb to make their own decisions, and therefore they must decide for them. And we look at someone like Senator Chuck Schumer. I've harped on this for years, where he said, you can't go against the intelligence community because they have 6 ways from Sunday for getting back at you. Right. Now, here is the Senate, at the time he was Senate Minority Leader, warning about how powerful the intelligence agencies are. And the idiot who was interviewing him, Rachel Maddow, starts laughing about it. When if I was interviewing him, I would be like, well, don't you find it concerning that you're supposed to have oversight over these agencies and you have to fear them and the power they have? And that's not the way it's supposed to be. Who's been held accountable over the last 20 years for all the abuses we've seen? Now, forget about Trump. Let's take Trump out of the equation. We've seen spying on James Rosen. We see spying on the AP, the Associated Press, which is far left. We see spying on Cheryl Atkinson. We've seen spying on ordinary Americans. We've seen spying on sitting members, duly elected members of the United States Senate. We've seen officials just openly lie in front of Congress. Now, if you're a conservative and you lie before Congress, you'll go to jail for that.
Right.
But if you're part of a bureaucracy and you openly lie to Congress, there are no consequences. So
Clapper and Brennan both lied to Congress, and we know they did.
Well, in fact, John Brennan, James Clapper, Andrew McCabe, and James Comey all lied to Congress.
Yeah,
that's indisputable.
Which is only a crime if you're a Republican. Look at this couple in Alaska, where the FBI's gone in and raided their house, took their computers, took their phones, has copies of all of their private text messages. Now, not only so, and this is part of what you have to.
And it was the wrong. It was the wrong person, right?
It's the wrong person. They thought they were January 6 people, and apparently they did not trespass.
And they're continuing to harass them. But think about this, folks.
And they can't get on an airplane.
Right.
If they go here's an interesting thing. If they go from, say, 2 cities, they have a layover, their luggage is pulled at that layover, they are opened up and gone through again. Every layer of their luggage. I mean, it's incredible what's happening to these people. And
now they did commit a crime.
They're actually laughing about it because it's so ridiculous.
Now, the crime they committed was they were present in Washington, D.C. during a Trump rally. Mm-hmm. That's their crime. They never went. They didn't go to the Capitol.
They probably got that information through Bank of America and the FBI.
But then you look at Tucker Carlson, where they've actually been reading his emails and reading his text messages. Think about the power these people have to ruin your life.
And you have no recourse against them. That's the scariest part of everything.
None.
If they could do this to a president, if they could do it to a top journalist in the United States, they could do it to anyone. And even if their information is unfounded. So if it turns out they accuse me of domestic terrorism, which will all be domestic terrorists soon, if they accuse me of domestic terrorism, if they destroy my reputation, get me fired from my job, and then say, oops, we screwed up, he's not. I can't sue them to get my reputation back. I can't sue them for monetary damage to make up losing my position.
They will ruin you. They'll ruin your family. They'll ruin your friends. They'll ruin you if they can.
And they will take this information and they will leak it. So if they're out to get you, and by the way, let's say you're doing something you shouldn't be doing. So let's say that one of us is having an affair. They'll get that information. They'll leak that information because they can. And there's nothing you're going to do about it.
But it doesn't even have to be true. You don't even have to be having an affair for them to leak that and say you are.
The problem today is with Democrats and with the mainstream media, an accusation is an indictment. And that's what it is.
Again, it's only one way.
It's actually a guilty. It's actually being found guilty today.
But it only goes one way.
Right.
Only goes one way.
Because if you're on the other side, you could pretty much be Hunter Biden, do whatever you want. And therefore, you're not even allowed to raise the accusation, even though you have his own words and videos.
You know, it's amazing to me that it's so apparent, I would think, to the American people that this is such a injustice, the way he's being treated or not being treated. He's not being prosecuted. He's not being investigated. He's not, simply because he's Biden's son. It's the only reason.
Yes, he's the prince.
But are the American people now waking up? Because I thought that, first of all, I'm part of a teachers union. So I'll state that off the bat. And my union is actually pretty good compared to the other unions out there. But the American Federation of Teachers came out and basically said, any parents that oppose critical race theory, we're going to squash them like a bug. Right. And yes, I'm exaggerating and I'm putting words in their mouth.
And we've put together a legal fund to go after them.
Correct. And so we're going to target parents. Once again, the parents thought that the schools were operating in good faith. They're not. Now, as a teacher, I'm looking at what the American Federation of Teachers is doing, and I say that's the most damaging thing you could do to teachers is say that you're going to target parents. Closing down schools and going with distance learning. Are the unions, the big apparatuses that exist, are they so out of touch that we are going to see this huge backlash?
The government wants your children. They want them from the day they're born until the day they die. So they want control over them.
I got a question for both of you. Sorry, Chuck. Why don't we put cameras in classrooms? Well, why can I have a camera in my dog sitting place, right? Where I can log onto my phone and see how my dog's doing at doggy daycare, but I can't have a camera in my kid's classroom?
It depends on the classroom you're talking about, because I certainly won't want a camera in my classroom, because then when I'm shaming my students and I'm pushing back against them and
But you've got adult students. I'm talking about kids.
My students are still like kids.
But
They're adults, but they don't.
But why can't I see what my third grader's doing? Why can't there be a camera in there?
Well, you saw what happened when they're doing not teleconferencing, but teleteaching, that these teachers would come on and they found out that the parents are watching and going, wait a minute.
But here's something that most Americans don't know, that by law, as a taxpaying American, you have the right to sit in on any class you want, that you could go to your child's school unannounced.
We pay for it.
You don't have to announce it. You could go to your child's school and say, hey, I want to sit in on the classroom today. Now, I advise parents with kids in high school, don't do that. Your kids will hate you because they don't want you in the classroom. But for elementary school, maybe it's a good idea that parents organize. And then every week or so, another parent comes in and says, I want to sit in on the classroom, see what's being taught, see how the class is going, see how my child's doing. By law, you're allowed to.
I bet they would deny them.
Well, of course, because the powers that be don't care. We're seeing that with the school boards that are telling the parents, oh, you're screaming and yelling, we're shutting down the school board meeting anymore. Yeah. You're violent. You're saying that you want to withhold tuition funds in escrow. You're committing an act of violence against the $30,000 a year school. So we're going to kick those kids out of school. That's how far we've gotten.
Well, I think when we live in a world right now where we have no protection from cameras, because think about it, we can't go out of our homes today without being surveilled by a camera, right?
Can't be in your home without being surveilled by a camera. You got a cell phone and the camera, these tech companies are scary and they are beholden to the government.
I'll tell you something. I'll get back to this point in just a minute, Mark, but let me tell you something that happens to us all the time. My wife and I, we'll be talking about a product and all of a sudden on my phone will come an advertisement for that product.
That's because you have Siri activated.
Yeah.
That's why I don't have Siri activated on my phone. So what Siri does is Siri actually...
Hang on just a second. My wife does not have Siri activated, and it comes on her phone.
Interesting.
But it doesn't matter. If you look at when you click the I agree and the updates and everything, apps could access the recording sound of everything. You're giving them permission to do all this. Now, normally it's for advertising purposes. However, what's concerned me is that corporations, big tech, and the government have all become one. It's not like there's any real difference between them. And the corporations have proven that they'll freely give over any information at the request of government without any warrants or anything like that. They've sold this out a long time ago.
Yep.
Well,
back to your point, Mark.
Yeah, my point is, in a world where we have lost our right to privacy, where we're constantly being monitored by cameras everywhere we go, why is there not cameras in classrooms? This is low tech. This is simple low tech where parents could log in from their phone any time of the day or night and see what their kids are up to.
Mark, let me ask a question. Excuse me, Nick, just a second. Has there been any advocacy for this? Have people been talking about this? Because I haven't heard this before.
The talk is now starting. And I will say that sooner or later, I do believe that cameras will be in the classrooms, but not for the people. It's going to be to make sure the teachers are teaching what the powers that be want them to teach. That's what's going to happen once the cameras do go in the classroom, to ensure that you are getting critical race theory and anti-bias, anti-racist training and all this other crap.
So just for the overlords to watch, not for us.
No, we're the peons. Nobody cares about the peasant class. No, the peasant class is irrelevant. It's the powers that be, the ruling elite, that are ones that want to sit there and control everything. Unfortunately, we as the American people have freely allowed them to do this. And so I do want to bring it to a point where we have to start speaking up. We have to start speaking out. And it can't just be some conservative podcasts like Blunt Force Truth and the PAS report. It has to come from ordinary Americans that actually hold officials accountable. Yeah, right. We need it at this point.
Nick, when we look back at history, and obviously you teach this stuff, we look back at history, the founding fathers were not only leaders of their time, they were the 1%. They were the wealthy. And these are people, when we think about it, these are people who actually had good lives.
Under British rule, yeah.
Right. So what was going on with the Brits wasn't really ruining George Washington's life or Thomas Jefferson's life, because these guys, they had mansions, they had... George Washington was actually the wealthiest president in history until Donald Trump. These people sacrificed their treasure, their lives, everything they had to make a better America. And they didn't need to do it personally.
And I tell my students that all the time, that when they signed that declaration, I ask my students, what do you think would have happened if the British won the American Revolution? What do you think would have happened to every signer on the Declaration of Independence? They would have been hung as a statement, never to cross King George again. And guess what? The founding fathers, it's not like we had this grandiose vision that we would actually defeat the British. It's not like they were hoping that if we don't win, because odds are we weren't going to win, it was a superior military we were going up against, that it may force to some change.
I don't think people understand how superior they were. No. They were the number one infantry in the world, the highest trained infantry in the world. They were the number one Navy in the world. I mean, we were going against the most powerful people in existence.
By all computer war game simulations that have been done on the Revolutionary War, we should have lost 99% of all battles.
100%.
I'm going to tell you a little story in closing here that I told Mark the other day that maybe you do know, is a historical fact. We know that John Adams was a abolitionist, and he talked about it all the time. And then he was also a president who ran for Congress and became a congressman. And he would go on the floor and he would talk about slavery. Interestingly enough, there was a edict in Congress promoted by the South that the word slavery could not be used. So he would get censored every time he used it. So he would use it over and over and over again and throw it in their face. When he died giving a speech on the floor of Congress, a little-known congressman held up his hand and said, "I would like to be able to carry his body off the congressional floor." Do you know who that congressman was?
No.
Well, interestingly enough, it was a little-known congressman from Illinois named Abraham Lincoln, and he carried Adams' body off the floor of Congress.
Was that John Quincy Adams?
No, that was John Adams, or John, the son, not the father. The father was founding father.
Just wanted to make sure for timing.
Yeah,
John Quincy.
No, well, that's the thing. And a lot of the founding fathers, when we look back, actually did have a problem with slavery.
His father, by the way, who was president, also was an abolitionist.
He was, along with Benjamin Franklin, turned out to be an abolitionist, Alexander Hamilton, Patrick Henry, Governor Morris of Virginia.
But they were all racist.
Of course, in this day and age.
My whole point on this thing is it's very easy to turn away from the truth and put your focus on your own world. And Chuck, you and I have talked about this before. A lot of what's going on here, to be quite honest, we're above it. It's not going to get us. But evil triumphs when good people do nothing.
And that's the thing. And that's why people have to start speaking out, have to start pushing back and get rid of this political class that is absolutely thoroughly corrupt, and then reshape the bureaucracy to the original intent of this country. Because once again, if we just adhere to what the founding fathers warned us about, we'd actually be in good shape. And Chuck and Mark, I love talking to you guys. We could talk for hours about all this. I really appreciate you coming on. Everyone needs to check out Blunt Force Truth Podcast, one of the best podcasts out there, outside of the PAS report, of course. I want to thank you guys for joining me.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you very much.
It's always an honor to be here.
And it is an honor to be here. Thank you again.
See, that's why I didn't start out with any monologues today, because I know I could go all day with those two. Chuck and Mark are good people. They're great Americans. Be sure to check out Blunt Force Truth Podcast, bluntforcetruth.com. I also have the link up at the PAS report, and you could also follow Chuck Woolery, Mark Young on Twitter. Have the links up as well for that. So make sure you check it out. Go to PASreport.com. As always, keep the ratings and reviews coming. And if you haven't done so yet, please give the PAS Report a 5-star rating. Take 30 seconds to write a review and share this podcast with family and friends. Reviews and sharing the podcast, it's what makes our voices heard out there. And it allows us to compete with the propaganda media outlets that are just poisoning the minds of Americans. It's time we take on the media industrial complex head on. And I want to thank you for joining me today. I want you to stay safe and be sure to tune in on Wednesday to another great episode of the PAS Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the PAS Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.